Que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será para mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito, nada.
Yo a Cuba le cantara una canción, tendría que ser un son revolucionario, pie con pie, mano con mano, corazón a corazón, corazón a corazón, pie con pie, mano con mano. ¿Cómo se le habla a un hermano? Si me quieres, aquí estoy. ¿Qué más te puedo ofrecer? Si no continuar tu ejemplo, comandante, compañero, viva tu revolución. Si quiere conocer a Martí y a Fidel, a Cuba iré. Si quiere conocer los caminos del Che, a Cuba iré. Si quiere tomar ron pero sin Coca-Cola, a Cuba iré. Si quiere trabajar en la caña de azúcar, a Cuba iré. En un barquito se va al vaivén, a Cuba iré. Si quiere conocer a Martí y a Fidel, a Cuba iré.
Un Song para Cuba by the great Víctor Jara, the Chilean communist revolutionary musician. Long live Cuba Socialista, long live Nicaragua Sandinista, long live our people's revolutions in the global south, resisting capitalism, imperialism, settler colonialism, resisting all of the fucked up systems out there that we constantly speak out about, and our peoples in the global south are fighting this at the forefront, despite sanctions, despite attacks, despite coup attempts. Our peoples are resisting. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 104, Unmasking Imperialism, exposing imperialist propaganda in mainstream media. Today, Socialism in Cuba and Nicaragua. Shout out to these two amazing countries, and also shout out to our amazing comrades, sisters, and brothers in Venezuela, Chavista, Bolivariana. Long live, of course, President Nicolás Maduro and the Partido Socialista Unida de Venezuela. Today, we're going to talk about socialist construction in Cuba and Nicaragua. We're going to speak with two comrades. You guys know them, two amazing comrades who I have frequently on the show, who recently visited the Latin American countries on a solidarity delegation. We discussed the accomplishments of socialism carried out by the Communist Party of Cuba and the Sandinista National Liberation Front. We also debunk imperialist propaganda about Cuba and Nicaragua while exposing the crippling impact of U.S. sanctions. And we talk about what we as anti-imperialists in the imperial core can do to stand in solidarity with sanctioned nations. And by the way, if you guys hear that little horn in the back, that's the guy who sells elotes, which are corn. Here in LA, that's like a staple. You know, the guy comes around his little cart. He sells the corn, elote, we call it out here. I think in South America, they call it chocolo. And so he's out there. I usually buy from him on Friday, so he's probably hitting me up. But joining us today are amazing comrades, Erica Caines and Chris Durán. Erica is a poet, writer, organizer in Baltimore and DMV area. She's an organizing committee member of the Anti-War Coalition, Black Alliance for Peace, as well as an outreach member of the Ujima People's Progress Party, and also founded Liberation Through Reading in 2017. Please support Liberation Through Reading, which provides Black children with books that represent them. Very, very important. And Erica recently participated in the January 7th to 16th Women in Nicaragua Power and Protagonism Delegation organized by the Jubilee House Community, Casa Benjamin Linder, and Alliance for Global Justice. I also think the Friends of the ATC, the Rural Workers Association, was involved in that as well. How's it going, Erica?
Peace, peace.
Most definitely. Glad to have you on, Erica. Always a pleasure. And by the way, shout out to everybody who's watching and listening. Shout out to Chris, BAP. Yeah, shout out to Black Alliance for Peace. Go show BAP some love, some support. Amazing organization. Honestly, one of the few groups out there that I personally, you guys know how I feel about a lot of groups and organizations. One of the few groups I think is actually worth supporting. So please go and support BAP. Black Alliance for Peace is a very, very important organization to support. Of course, joining us, the compañero Chris Durán, community organizer working with Free Mall, New Jersey. Also works with several other campaigns to free U.S. held political prisoners and prisoners of war. Chris is a recent graduate of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at NYU, and he is a member of the 51st contingent of the Venceremos Brigade to Cuba. Also an amazing group. Please support Venceremos Brigade, the real ones. All these fucking whack liberals are like, I've been to Cuba. No, you haven't gone to Cuba if you haven't gone with Venceremos. So that, fuck all those people who are like, oh, I've been to Cuba. I took the pic with a cigar and all this and that. Nah, you didn't experience Cuba if you didn't go with Venceremos. So shout out to Venceremos. And Chris's delegation took place from December 27th to January 6th. How's it going, Chris?
Peace, it's going great. The only thing that sucks is being back here in New York.
No, most definitely. Both of you guys look so full of life and vibrant. I think that when you go to socialist countries in the global south and you're in, especially like in the weather of our countries and our peoples, it's warm, it's nice, you got the palm trees, you got fruit everywhere, you know what I mean? So it's just a whole different vibe. And then you come back to Babylon, you come back to the imperial core, everyone's miserable, everything's cold, you're just like, what the fuck am I doing here? But we have a fight here to do, and that's what we're talking about today. So Erica, if you want to maybe start off and maybe tell us a little bit about your recent delegation, how why you chose to go, what you thought of Nicaragua. I've been there a few times, and I've got to say it's like such a beautiful country, and I'm glad you were able to go, and I like it as well because I'm glad you went, Erica, as well, because a lot of times even within the left, I think a lot of people really are not educated about the Sandinista revolution, and are not really aware of it, So, but there's a lot of amazing things to learn there. So what did you think of your trip out there? Tell us a little bit about what you saw and what you experienced.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was my the first trip of its kind. I got to go with the Jubilee House. The Friends of ATC, they were there, but not with our delegation per se. So we did all get to meet up in the last night and have a dinner and a sort of celebration. But yeah, it was incredible. It was an incredible experience. I'm grateful that Jill Clark reached out and invited me. My son was also supposed to go. I had started a GoFundMe, like a little soft launch that I sent just to BAT members. And what happened was it got frozen because Nicaragua recently got sanctioned, I think like 3 days before I started the GoFundMe. So it got flagged. And by the time that was all handled, it would have just been too late for my son to get his passport and everything in order. So he wasn't able to go. But there are other opportunities that are presenting itself for me to go. And him to come along with me in the future. That picture was me and Baba Mukasa Dada,
Mm.
folks know of the Black Power and All Power, SNCC, the Student Violent Coordinating Committee. Him and his wife were there, so that was an incredible experience to spend 10 days with them. This was on our way to Ciudad Sandino. So that was it was really great. But I do agree there should be more Africans on, more Black and brown people on these colonized people on these trips. Because it was me, him, and his wife were the only Africans on the trip, but it was a great experience nonetheless. I enjoyed it. Really felt like I've never experienced or seen anything like it. So I honestly have not shut my mouth about Nicaragua since. And it's been kind of jarring coming back because on the day I come back, a protester is killed and like two other people are killed by police. And I just left the country where they're not even armed. So it was just really jarring for me to
Yeah.
really a lot to be back.
And what are some things that you learned over there? Like something like what are seeing obviously socialism is a process, and we know there's a lot of people who will say, well, they're not really socialists. They're not pure 100% socialist as I imagine them in my head.
Right.
There's a lot of things they have to overcome: sanctions, they have to overcome centuries of colonization and poverty imposed by the imperialists. But nonetheless, the Sandinistas are carrying out socialist construction. What are some examples of positive socialist construction that you saw in Nicaragua on the day-to-day level?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on on and on about that. I think the way we understand or the way people like to understand socialism, I don't think they, like you said, understand it as a process. Um, what was explained to me was the 16 years, what they call the dark years of neoliberalism from 1990 to 2006, where the Sandinista government lost the election, um, and it was like privatized most of the country. So all the gains and all the progress that it made, even through the Contra wars, was sort of lost in those 16 years, and it's a process of regaining it back. A lot of what they do, what was explained to me is like an ethics of life. So they everything that they move or everything that they structure, um, how they structure society is through that. So even in the vein of, I think they say Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. That's literally how they structure their communities. So everything is really on a block by block, like organizational level, and everyone is organized, and everyone is encouraged to organize, and everyone is unionized, even the street vendors. So that was something that was you were just mentioning the guy who sell corn, right? So in Nicaragua, he'd be unionized. Um, so that was just a different experience. Even the hospitals per se, like all of the advances that they made, um, it was just remarkable to see it on a day-to-day, everyday level. And most of it is the majority of it is encouraged. So on a community level, they have health promoters. So those are people who are in the neighborhood who encourage health education, um, family planning, even because in the more disenfranchised communities, because again, they're rebuilding, especially after 2018. There was a lot of hits that organizations have taken because the country is restructuring itself, especially the way that NGOs played a part specifically. So, we have to level what is an NGO that's beneficial, that's always been here, and what's one that's influenced by the West. So a lot of it is people having to refile paperwork. And after 2018 and the attempted coup, a lot of money has been pulled out that a lot of foundations have relied on. So people are definitely rebuilding. Yeah, you can see it, Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. And that's really all over. Um, it's all over in different signs. Sandino's everywhere. Sandino's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a different experience. Just to be able to see that. I know one of the delegation members and I, we were discussing just the way that the murals and the statues and the homages to martyrs and revolutionary heroes is just something on a day to day that you just don't see here. Like, and then we were just discussing like Harriet Tubman is getting put in front of the CIA and what that would inevitably mean here. But for the most part, it's just a really different experience, and I'm glad that I got to see it because taking it back, it gave me so much to consider and think about. Even the way that the co-ops have created little liberated zones in the mountains, even. So yeah, so it was just a lot to think about and think through. We got to see Parliament, the Ministry of Women. 51% of the government is women. They have it structured as so because it's constitutional, women have to be represented, but not represented in the way that we understand representation. There's an ideological base for the representation, which is a different sort of understanding that we have here. Yeah, so with the 51%, for instance, if I was running, my running mate would have to be a man, and vice versa. If there was a man running, it would have to be a woman, just so that there's that level of representation. So there is a push and pull struggle. The women are very strong and passionate. We met a lot of women union leaders. So yeah, so their voices are really considered and weighed out in a lot of the processes, and it's evident in the way that Nicaragua is very, when you look at the percentages compared to their neighboring countries, it's very safe for women. And especially oh, I love that statue. I forget what it's called too. I meant to write that down. I was taking so much notes. It's hard for me to even do brief because there's so much I want to say, and it's like this can't be a dissertation, like narrow it down. But even now I'm trying to say as much as possible in a short span of time. But even saying things like that, that's a tribute to workers. So you see that he has the AK-47, but he also has like the sickle in the other hand as well. So yeah, it was just incredible to be there, to see the advances, to see the state-of-the-art parks. People were telling me Managua used to be dirt lots, and I can't even imagine it. The tree of life, those trees of life, I'm obsessed with. They were also saying, the hierarchy, the Catholic hierarchy, are trying to say that the trees of life were like demonic because they look like 666s and all kind of crap. But but no, it's so beautiful. Like the way that it's so colorful and so luscious and so green. I never seen greenery like that. I stood at the top of a volcano, somewhat. I stood close enough.
Yeah.
I got the experience. But it was life changing, I think.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I Nicaragua is very beautiful. My family is from Honduras, which is like right there. It's very close. Our Central American countries are very small, So it's like saying states. It's like saying going from Virginia to North Carolina. It's like right there. And you see such a contrast between socialism in Nicaragua and capitalism in Honduras. And one of the things that's beautiful about Nicaragua is the food sovereignty and how their anti-imperialism and decolonization also is represented and carried out on the plate and when it comes to food, because a lot of hipsters and liberals talk about organic and locally produced and all this stuff, and Nicaragua, they're actually doing it. Like over 85% of food that people eat in Nicaragua is produced locally from within a 10-mile radius. And just the level of consciousness about food and imperialism, and also the consciousness around women's rights and supporting campesinos and campesinas, peasants and farmers as the base of the country, I think is really beautiful to see. So, I'm glad you were able to experience that, Erica. And I'm sure maybe even next time, I'm not sure if you were able to go to Bilwi or to the coast. Were you able to go to
No, I didn't get to go to the
coast? Okay.
But I did get to dance to calypso music.
Okay, cool.
The coast, so I got the kinship experience. So
Cool.
I'm hoping next time that I do get to go. But yeah, to the point too, I did want to say that I did get to meet some campesina feministas. So there was conversations about the decolonial feminism. It's just, I mean, I've spoken to comrades because I've gotten to miss several delegation trips throughout the years. People were coming and going, but they always say, there's a level of sophistication in organizing in the global South that you just won't experience or can't experience until you do. And it's really a level of clarity that that even workers, because they don't even consider themselves, workers. They say peasants, they say campesinas, and they talk about Managua feminism as being distinctly, the same sort of way that we would talk about, the mainstream feminism. So it's a level of clarity in the way that they talk about decolonization, especially around feminism, and especially around ideas of socialism and community-based organizing. Like that ethics of life really shapes the way that they maneuver and go about their everyday.
Most definitely. Beautiful, beautiful. And if you guys can see behind me, that sombrero and the machete, I got those from Nicaragua, and those are like common. Like you'll see a lot of the workers in the fields, cutting coffee, cutting plantains, bananas, and all this stuff. And so I have it up there as like a homage to that. But beautiful, beautiful stuff. Chris, you were in Cuba from December 27th to January 6th, and you were able to go with the Venceremos Brigade. Amazing. I've been trying to go with them for years. I've been trying to go to Cuba already for like 4 times. And every time I'm like this close to going, something happens, or like my trip gets canceled, my delegation gets rescheduled, or I have work. Like something always has happened where I haven't been able to go. So it kind of sucks, but I'm glad that you were able to go and see and experience Cuba with an actual revolutionary organization. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it really bothers me when, especially after normalization under Obama, that all of these liberals and people who just like the aesthetic of Cuba, they go to Cuba and they just want to experience that, take their little picture, but they don't understand the politics. They don't understand the importance of socialism. What was your experience like? Tell us about what you did out there and your thoughts on socialist construction in Cuba.
Yeah, so I found out about the Venceremos Brigade through a mentor of mine, who's like an elder, community organizer, in the Newark area. But he encourages people, and he encouraged me to go on the Venceremos Brigade, largely because of the fact that they are an organization dedicated to certain political principles that are dedicated to building solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. There are 4 points of unity that the Venceremos Brigade is organized around, that include the closing of Guantanamo Bay, the illegally occupied U.S. military base there on the island, the removal of Cuba from the terrorist watch list that the U.S. has them on, the right of people to travel freely and the ending of the blockade against Cuba and any sanctions against the country. So I felt like it was very important for me, when I had this opportunity to, take this, basically take this opportunity to get plugged in with folks who work in active solidarity with Cuba, who bring, material aid to actually work with organizations that, are charged with distributing such aid to like different unions, different organizations, and different communities in Cuba. Also, went to your point earlier of having more Black and brown folks on the brigade. There was a large presence, and especially in leadership, of African colonized folks on the Venceremos Brigade in order to sort of counter that largely Anglo-American centeredness of that has caused some problems in the past with brigades to Cuba and other countries in Latin America. But my experience in terms of like seeing socialism in practice, they're not dissimilar from what Comrade Erica was describing in Nicaragua. Like a lot of the same things that she was mentioning, I felt were very familiar in my experiences in Cuba. One of the huge things that like I've experienced in some of the other brigadistas, that I became comrades with on the trip, since coming back to the United States, is like this completely different like worldview that people operate in. And, like you said, like it's like a completely different paradigm. I was in, even, comparing it to other countries in Latin America, like you mentioned Honduras, like I was in Chile a few months ago as well. And, it's a country that I'm connected to by family. And, just comparing like the impact of socialism on similar conditions, in the global South and Latin America, is such a stark contrast. And you can see like the importance of having that level of organization in the society and, putting things, such as healthcare and education first, which are the two primary points of the Constitution of Cuba. In terms of, actually looking after society, they were, I mean, when we were talking with like Cuban doctors and, even Cuban military, like they were honestly shocked at just how things regularly occur in the United States. They were shocked to know the conditions of prison in the United States. They were shocked to know the conditions of healthcare, how mental health is treated in the United States. They were shocked to know the alienation between law enforcement and military and the people of the United States. One of the things is like in Cuba, like never once did any of the folks on the brigade actually feel like unsafe at night walking anywhere in any of the cities that we're in. And, these are in cities where, you go to New York and you see, or even the small suburbs in New Jersey, and you see cops who are just like, they got the nightstick, taser, gun, everything on them. And in Cuba, like they barely carried weapons, and if they did, it would be like a taser. And so it was much more relaxed. People had a stronger sense of social solidarity, of respect for one another, just on a daily basis. And it was very much observable in terms of like the amount of love that people had for each other. Just a very different way of operating that people engaged in compared to the United States. And again, to the point of food sovereignty, in Cuba is measured. I mean, it's two things, right? I mean, like the blockade prevents, obviously, I mean, the shortages by the blockade are obvious in Cuba. You can see the effects. But that was also one of the things that people observed was that, the food quality in Cuba was, I mean, a world's away from the United States. As soon as we got back here, everyone started having stomach problems. you know, all types of problems like eating the bullshit here. And it's funny, like the first experience when we were in the hotel in Miami when we got back, like one of the first things we saw was like this old white man with American flag sneakers wearing a fucking dashiki. And
the fuck?
Yeah.
Oh shit.
And then like the first thing that folks had to eat was like Wendy's, and I was like, oh god.
Dude. It was a perfect image of just fucking like decaying empire.
And also Florida. I mean,
yeah,
all those stereotypes about like, you know, Florida man on the news is, you know,
yeah.
They seem to be the regular news stories in Florida. Also, the news and the TV, like in Cuba, was a lot more, you know, it was more informative. It was more based on like stories that like actually like mattered. And you know, there is you can see why people are generally more educated, you know, outside the United States, and in particular in Cuba, and able to talk about, you know, things that Americans never. I mean, be realistic, you know. So folks are not able to talk about certain things. So,
how was the art, by the way? So we have on the screen one of the pics you sent me. What are we looking at right now? It's a beautiful picture.
So this is I don't know. I hope I don't get the name wrong, but this is this is the Plaza of the Revolution in the city of Camagüey. So one of the things also we for the brigade, we focused on cities on the eastern part of the island, which is majority Afro-Cuban. So this is in the city of Camagüey. This is the primary statue there at the top is dedicated to a hero of the Wars of Independence against the Spanish named Ignacio Agramonte, who was the commander of a cavalry brigade that came out of Camagüey. And obviously there's also there's a big thing of like connecting that long history of struggle and sort of this process of like education of like connecting a long period of like anti-colonial struggle that goes from like Hathaway and like the Tainos, you know, to like Africans brought to Cuba, you know, to the Wars of Independence, you know, up until, and as depicted by the picture, the revolution that occurred in '59 and that is continuing with the revolutionary process today. So obviously you see Fidel and Che and folks below that, but that's actually also somewhat it's also like a mini museum in this plaza where they also have dedication to Fidel on the inside of it, where Fidel's ashes were laid there when they were bringing him around the different cities of the country when he was being laid to rest.
Beautiful. The artwork in Cuba, I imagine, is amazing and beautiful as well, and it's something that I would love to check out. And I love the fact that a lot of the art in Cuba and Nicaragua is socialist realism. It depicts real people and real historical struggles and moments, working class people. It's not this abstract postmodern nonsense of like a fucking a splat and like a can and 4 eye, you know, all this random shit that liberals love. It's none of that. It's revolutionary proletarian art. And it's important to maintain that because this postmodern stuff is really designed to promote individualism, to promote egocentrism, to promote bourgeois values. And proletarian socialist realism and revolutionary art promotes community. You never see just one people. It's always Fidel and somebody, Sandino and somebody. You know, it's a group of people. What I want to do, Eric, I want to play a clip. This is a clip from France 24 English, Nicaragua's Ortega, President Daniel Ortega, from revolution to dictatorship. So I want to play this. And here they talk a lot of the common talking points about Nicaragua, that they had a great revolution before, and you know, they just stopped caring or they betrayed the revolution or whatever. So I'm going to play this and I want to get your reaction to that.
When he ditched law school to become a revolutionary, he made his dissident family proud. In 1963, Daniel Ortega joined the Sandinista National Liberation Front, a left-wing movement that brought down the dynastic dictatorship of the Somoza family. He then led the Sandinista Revolution from 1979 to 1990, fighting against the US-backed anti-socialist Contra militias. Ortega was elected president in 1984, but the war raged on until his surprising defeat at the polls by Violeta Chamorro 6 years later. Swapping his fatigues for white shirts and Marxist slogans for a pro-business platform, Ortega made a successful comeback, and he's been president ever since 2007. Until recent years, his leadership saw strong economic growth thanks to cozy relations with business leaders and the oil-rich Venezuela. But it's also become increasingly authoritarian, with costs not just economic, but human. In 2018, he responded to mass protests with a brutal crackdown in which more than 300 were killed and thousands injured. And 3 years later, he's imprisoned dozens of political opponents, including several rival candidates for the presidency and some of his former revolutionary comrades.
Cosido los labios. Ya quisiera verlos con los labios cosidos. Estén cosidos, los inventan. ¿Cuántas cosas inventan? Simplemente para crear una imagen negativa de Nicaragua.
One person has been at his side throughout, Rosario Murillo, whom he married in 2005 and made vice president in 2017. Ortega, in his mid-70s, now rarely appears in public, and she's become the face of the government. Together, they battled for 16 years to regain power. They don't want to give it up now.
My fault. I was muted. My fault. Yeah, typical bullshit that they say. Yeah. That it was a dictatorship. That once, and you'll see this a lot too, Erica. I'm not sure if you were able to meet people like this, or you'll see this a lot, where you'll have a lot of white liberals who, during the 70s and the 80s, when the Sandinistas weren't in power yet, when they were fighting against the U.S.-backed Somoza dictatorship, they supported Nicaragua back then. They were like, yeah, we support, because they weren't in power, right? It was easier to defend. After the Sandinistas took power and all the hard shit came, the contras, the drugs, the gangs, the coup attempts, everything, that's when all the white liberals are like, peace, I'm out. You guys are a dictatorship, So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I've learned, especially in accordance with the 1990 elections and how that all went down, is that the Sandinista Revolution was a united front revolution. So it was a revolution of all sectors of society that were involved. So there was a unity against Somoza and that family dictatorship, but for different reasons. And that sort of came to a head after the government started leaning towards its more Marxist-Leninist principles, even though Sandinismo is both Marxist-Leninist and Catholicism, which was very interesting for me to learn how much Catholicism played a role in that revolution in Sandinista's period. They take that very seriously, so that was really interesting. To learn about religion and revolution in that sense. When we went to mass, there was a person who said there's no contradiction between revolution and religion, but they do understand the role that the church played in the 2018 attempted coup. So, so those were the people, because I know there was a split, right, with the Sandinistas in the 90s. And that was because of those sort of separate class interests in those, separate class sects of society. And from that split, they were the people who were prompting up the 2018 the attempted coup that happened. But it's very interesting, even the imagery that you just shown, right? Did you see any police in those streets?
Nope.
The way that they even described it, those were the people who were attacking people. There were no police in the streets because Ortega did not allow anybody to go out. They were literally stuck in their stations because he recognized that had he gone to suppress those people, they would have certainly called in, because they were calling for the blue helmets to come in, and they were calling for U.S. intervention. They would have certainly come in if he would have had those if he would have had the police intervene. So they did not intervene. And those roadblocks went on for about 3 months before the workers themselves started to go out and started to assist the police in coming out. So, I mean, I just thought it was very interesting because I'm listening to it, right? You can hear them saying, you know, the suppression, and you're literally seeing no police in that street because they're not trained to suppress people in that way. Even when we, I was sort of making posts on Instagram as I was there, and I was talking about the relationship to police. Those feminists and those women organizations that do great work around women's safety and finding women resources, having dealt with abuse on any level, they rely heavily on the police. There is a collaborative relationship. And when I spoke about the way that police interact here, it was sort of like not like a misunderstanding, but they couldn't fathom not relying on police the way that they have to, especially when I talked about, like, even in the ethics of life, the way that that is structured, it requires that dealing with women also means dealing with the Ministry of Women, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health. Like, they're not single issue organizing in Nicaragua in the way that they're single issue organizing here. So that struck me as something that, you know, it is absolutely possible because they all have to be in conversation together. So there are programs that are interworking programs. And the police there are trained for trauma and specific women's issues because women's ministry is a part of the Ministry of Education. There's gender equity studies in all across from primary to higher education. So that to me was just the difference. But that's not the way they discuss Ortega and those advances that are being made. I mean, the amount of roads, they have already created the bridge to reach out to the coastal regions. There's so many roads were being built when we were heading up to like Esteli and up into the mountains. All of those roads were new that were taking us there. Russia donated about 300 buses into the city of Managua because they use school buses as public transportation. So now they have actual like buses in Managua. There were new homes that were being built. I had asked about if they were considered apartments in the same way that Venezuela was building apartments, but then they were telling me they have PTSD from the earthquake, so they're never probably going to build things that high because of the 1972 earthquake. Because Managua sits on, I think, 4 fault lines. So they're really not about the apartments. But then also they were saying they also don't like to share walls. I thought that was very funny because when you look at the way that they structure their homes, there's like maybe this much space in between them, but they really do not want any sharing of the walls. But yeah, it's so much progress being made. The other thing that fascinated me is that they don't say President Ortega or Vice President. They say Compañero Daniel and they say Compañera Rosario. And I thought that was because they see them as comrades. They also say our government. So the authoritarian thing for me it's a lot of, you know, whatever, because they've never said the government or this government the way that I separate myself from
these motherfuckers, yeah.
because they are fully ingrained in a part of the decision making. Even when I talked about the street vendors being unionized, it's in such a way that, like, say you have your corner and then they have to do construction in that corner, they would pay the difference for having to move you.
Wow.
So that's something that, you know, you can't really even understand that is a society that works in tandem with one another on a constant day-to-day level. And, you know, there are things that are still not as advanced as it could be. For instance, the family code is not as advanced as Cuba's, but it's far more significantly advanced that what we don't even have a family code, for God's sake. Yeah. So we can start there. And then they are working towards education and popular education daily so that they could eventually have a referendum where it does make sense that people are understanding what they're voting on. So they are educating people about these different things that, you know, there's a lot of elders primarily who don't really understand a lot of these things, but they're not hesitant about it. There's just not a clear understanding about it. So there's a lot of popular education. Oh, and the other thing, COVID. Nicaragua never shut down.
Yep.
I found fascinating. They couldn't. If they shut down, especially after 2018, they would have crippled the country. They're doing better financially than their neighboring nations. There's over 90% of the country 2 and up is vaccinated, and that's vaccines from China, Cuba, and Russia. And then also, there hasn't been any reported COVID-related deaths since last May. So there's been a lot of popular education around COVID and getting vaccinated, and the Ministry of Health has been on it. Like, if you even suspect that you've come in contact, they're contacting you. So it's a different thing, and everybody is masked, you know. So yeah, it's a very different experience, and it was just mind blowing to have witnessed it, because there are so many advances, and the things that you hear that they say, it's just like, even the people are like, this is ridiculous, you know. They really truly understand Nicaraguan solutions for Nicaraguan problems in such a way that they are successful in that way.
Most definitely. Shout out to Salifu. And these are things that NGOs cannot do. People have to evolve their societal way of thinking without interference. Exactly. Shout out to you, Salifu. Salifu, an amazing, amazing comrade. And on that point about COVID-19, I think one thing that was fascinating when I went to Nicaragua last year is that a lot of the Sandinista leadership were skeptical of the U.S. jabs. So a lot of my disagreement with a lot of, in particular, white liberal leftists in the U.S. is that they were so gung-ho on making sure everyone got the jab from, you know, these companies, right? I'm not even going to say their names, because unfortunately, even just mentioning that is crazy. And if you mention that, you're nuts, but it's like, for Black and brown people who've been sterilized, forcibly vaccinated, all these things, it's understandable that you're going to be skeptical of these big pharma companies. And Nicaragua as well, they had a lot of Russian vaccines and Chinese medicines that they were using instead of the U.S. jab. So that was interesting. And also the fact that the Sandinista government, one of the things that they really promoted is immunity, natural immunity, fruits, vegetables. If you go to Nicaragua, one thing you'll notice is that people eat very clean. They eat their corn, their beans, their plantain, and they maintain the tradition and the health of the nation, because food is one of the weapons. I love Thomas Sankara, mentioning that the food is a weapon, right? Who feeds you controls you, and Nicaragua really does a great job at that. And that's, I think, one of the contributors to why the COVID-19 situation hasn't been as bad in Nicaragua, because people have, they have their little fruit juices every day, and natural sugar, no added sugars. They have their beans, they have natural. So it's.
And they also had in the hospitals, they have gardens of medicinal herbs and things like that at the hospital. The other thing is the hospitals are like painted pink, and that's Compañeras Rosaria's favorite color. So I thought that was interesting. Like, they love their government. So it's so wild to see the inferences that, it's authoritarian, or because they really deeply appreciate their government, because they see themselves as part of it.
Most definitely. And as Jada says, shout out to Jada. That's why food sovereignty is key to continued success in socialist countries. Chris, what I want to do, I want to play a clip. This is from our favorite channel, guys, Reason TV, libertarian right-wing imperialist propaganda. Why a dictatorship could crumble. Young Cubans have not been brainwashed. Some gusana from Florida who's helping, the Patria y Vida, Fatherland and Life movement in Cuba. You guys remember that psyop like a year or two ago, using Black and brown bodies to promote imperialism. So I'm going to play this clip, and we'll get some reaction from Chris about just the psyops and all of the imperialist propaganda that they're using, because it's very strong. Unfortunately, a lot of people are falling for it.
A massive protest movement broke out in Cuba in July of 2021. Food, medicine, and electricity shortages, exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, were pushing an already desperate, oppressed, and impoverished nation to the brink of rebellion. Demonstrators used the internet, which has only been legally available in the country since 2018, to coordinate action in large and small cities across the island.
Me sentí libre. Nunca en mi vida había vivido algo tan espectacular y maravilloso.
So the Cuban government quickly arrested hundreds of protesters and shut down the internet. Video of a YouTuber being pulled out of her room in the middle of a Spanish news broadcast went viral.
La van a detener en directo.
Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel appeared on state TV to call for the violent suppression of the protests against counter-revolutionaries.
A todos los revolucionarios del país, a todos los comunistas, a que salgan a las calles en cualquiera de los lugares donde se vayan a producir estas provocaciones. Hoy, desde ahora y en todos estos días.
In Miami, members of the sizable Cuban-American population plan to load their own fishing boats with supplies to make the 90-mile journey to the island themselves, but were deterred by the U.S. Coast Guard. They set off fireworks in international waters off the coast of Cuba instead.
I think what people don't understand is that the problem in Cuba stems from the fact that people can't do anything for themselves. How do you feed yourself? How do you make money? You're only allowed to make money if the government says it's okay. And that's how the government throttles people. They'll throw you in jail if you decide to try and feed your family on your own.
Martha Bueno is a Cuban-American activist who started the group People for Cuba following the protests. They assemble packages of dry foods and medical supplies and then pay people $35 a pound to smuggle them onto the island. They've shipped more than 800 pounds so far, but she says it's become more difficult in recent months as the Cuban government has cracked down on smuggled supplies.
The big reason that we have to smuggle it into Cuba is because if I send it legitimately through the Cuban government, if I raise thousands of dollars and send a container ship of medicine to Cuba, the Cuban government will take that and then sell it in the stores. And I wanted it to be humanitarian aid. People who needed it to be able to receive it without paying. And I especially won't help the Cuban government. I refuse to fundraise, pay for, and then give it to them so that they can sell it in the stores. I'm not that kind of girl.
She certainly isn't. In one of her most popular tweets, Bueno, an outspoken libertarian, wrote, "When my father was 21, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison for attempting to leave his country, Cuba. A year into his sentence, my fearless mother broke him out of jail. You might want to trade your freedom for safety, but I sure as hell don't." How did hearing these family stories growing up affect your political outlook and your view of current day events in Cuba?
How can it not? How can it not affect my political views when I can contrast? I can get on an airplane here and leave and go anywhere, which I do love to travel. And every time I get on an airplane, I think about that, how that simple action of trying to leave your country landed my father with a 6-year sentence. I mean, everything in my life, I can draw a parallel to what's happening in Cuba. Cuba wasn't always that way. Political decisions have led to people not having those freedoms. So of course I'm going to defend the freedoms we have. I feel like there's no other way.
With the Cuban government, they are no government. They are no government. They are a mob.
Danny Lugo came to America from Cuba 22 years ago and manages logistics for Bueno's operation. He says that even though the communist dictatorship has survived for 63 years, the courage and independence of Cuba's youth give him hope that change is finally coming.
I think there is a new generation of Cubans or young Cubans that have not been brainwashed. So that's our hope, and we want to help that generation to win the freedom.
Shout out to Salifu Romero. You love to trigger me. I gotta do it. I hate to do that. We gotta hear the gusanos. It's fucking crazy. It's fucking
They don't have no
crazy.
shame though. Like they're really
No shame.
grown men and women telling these big lies with no shame.
Guantanamera says hard sucking gusanos. Even Yeonmi Park. Shout out to Workers Reading Room, by the way, great channel. Even Yeonmi Park is more convincing than her. smuggle because of U.S. sanctions. Shout out to Big Teal. Love Big Teal. How are these people from more free Cuba don't have the same critique of the U.S.? Exactly. Chris, your thoughts, having just come back from Cuba?
I don't know where to start with that. I mean, I echo Salifu's sentiment. Wow, you just love to trigger me.
I love triggering you guys. I gotta do it.
It's crazy because one of the things when it's like, oh, the Cuban government is not a government, they're a mob. It's like, first of all, the Cuban government is a lot more grassroots oriented than like what could ever exist here. I mean, the level of engagement with people, again, throughout the country, to the fact where they can have like referendums on the Constitution, where they can have referendums on designing a new family code. It's just a higher level of like organization and like popular, participation in all levels of government than what could ever exist in a liberal system like the United States. Or again, like I said, in a liberal system like Chile, which is kind of designed by the United States. But it was interesting that he said like, oh, it's the mob, but it's like, the actual mob, the actual mafia that the U.S. had like in Cuba, they got kicked out in 1959. So maybe his parents are descended from that, and they're just still a little salty about that. But it's interesting though that question though of like political repression and political prisoners, because of the fact that there are political prisoners in the United States, who were part of anti-colonialist movements, who were actually fighting for the liberation of the masses of the people, and who have received support on numerous occasions from Cuba and the Cuban people. To the point where even like Cuban political prisoners, like members of the Cuban Five, who were held here in the United States, they've been in solidarity with people like Sundiata Acoli, like Mumia Abu-Jamal, like Leonard Peltier. Cuba has always, the Federation of Cuban Women, the Cuban government, they've always come out and supported Mumia, who is still in prison, since the 80s, and is a Black Panther veteran. And, we find that many of the people who are political prisoners are those who are veterans of the Black Panther Party, and also veterans of movements internationally. There are Colombian FARC members in prisons in the United States. There are Palestinian political prisoners. There are political prisoners that the United States holds on illegally occupied land in Guantanamo. And so all this stuff that, people like to, disregard, like the CIA, disregard imperialism and think that, oh, you're just overreacting. It's like you can see it, physically. In Cuba, the people who live, next to the military base can see imperialism right there. It's not a game. It's not imagined. And so these folks who, are part of this, like SOS Cuba or Patria y Vida, I mean, they're literally front groups for the CIA, and it's not even like that's not hyperbole. Like there's actual connection, like there's documents to like State Department like connections with that. And again, we have to go back to the purpose of the blockade and the implementation of the U.S. blockade on Cuba. The fact that they intimidate so many businessmen around the world, or business people around the world to not do business with Cuba. Which also goes to the importance of countries like China and Russia doing business with Cuba. The bus that we're on, the Venceremos Brigade, our bus was a Chinese-made bus. So, I mean, but the purpose of the blockade is literally word for word to create enough, discontent in Cuba, to create enough destabilization so that the Cuban people will rise up against their government because the government is too popular among the masses of people. So, I did not necessarily get the impression that Cubans are willing to get rid of their government en masse anytime soon. They recognize their lives and their country and their responsibility to each other as a part of a long-term anti-colonial struggle that they are still in a process of, figuring out. And that they're making great advancements in. And for it to just be sidelined by these bullshit conversations with like, these CIA ops, it's like, that is the American voice. And that's what people unfortunately, from the global south, a lot of times those are the folks that come to the U.S. They come to their little trash can so they can be trash with the rest of the U.S. And oppress, colonize people here. So,
yeah, most definitely. And I always remind people that the class nature of a Cuban quote unquote refugee and exile is so different from the class nature of Haitian migrants or Honduran migrants or Mexican, people who are fleeing capitalist right-wing countries that are affected and impacted by imperialism. And I think that's so important to remember, because I think a lot of times people lump in Latinos within one group and they're just like, oh, the Cuban Gusano Miami that has like 5 rentals and makes money from usury and banking, and they're connected to the CIA. They're completely different from a Mexican or a Haitian worker who's cleaning dishes, washing dishes in the back of a restaurant. So I think that's really, really important and crucial to mention.
And they're still making money off of Cuba. The only ones who make, who make the most money off of like the private businesses that were open in Cuba are these same Gusanos who are able to have connections to the island, and able to, somewhat, maybe have a family rent out a house or something, or, run their business for them. It's still just, it's a bunch of hypocritical shit. The only reason why the people of Cuba are, survive is because the state takes on the debt of the people. The state takes on, the responsibility for the economic welfare of the people. It's not up to private businesses, which is why they have a longer life expectancy than us, which is why it doesn't cost anything to go to school, which is why, housing is more accessible there, which is why a whole list of conditions, again, for a country that, with conditions that are comparable to the rest of the global South, it stands head and shoulders in terms of human rights. Above the country that steals the most from any other country, which is the one that we live in here. So,
yeah, most definitely. What I want to do, just to kind of wrap up here in the last few minutes of the stream, it's been really amazing having you guys on. I just want to play a clip. This is a clip that I recorded. So when I went to Nicaragua in July of 2021, I was there for the anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution, July 19th. And it was a beautiful experience. Even with, this was during COVID, so not as many people came, but there were still literally thousands of people from all over the country who went to Plaza de la Revolución. In Cuba, they also have one as well, which is the tradition in a lot of, in Latin American societies, our cities are designed around plazas, plaza, central plaza. And typically what you have is a church on one side, and on the other side, the Congress, Congreso Nacional or Asamblea Nacional, whatever you call it in your country. So in Cuba, in 1959, you had the Cuban Revolution. You have the Plaza de la Revolución in Cuba, historic site. 20 years later, 1979, in Nicaragua, you had the victory of the Sandinista Revolution. They also went to the plaza, also named it the Plaza de la Revolución. And the emotions were running high in Cuba in particular, because now Cuba finally had another successful socialist revolution a few years after the coup against Salvador Allende in Chile, which unfortunately, was overthrown very quickly by the U.S. imperialists. So now, 20 years later, you have the Sandinista revolution. So that plaza, is where the guerrillas from the countryside ended up landing and getting toward liberating the country from the U.S.-backed dictator. So I went to that plaza and I interviewed young people at this anniversary celebration of the revolution. So I want to play this, and this in particular are 2 young women who are Sandinista organizers, to get their thoughts, to hear their thoughts on why they defend the Sandinista revolution. I want to hear from Erica, her thoughts on that, and her final thoughts on her experience in Nicaragua. So this is from, if you guys want to watch the full video, it's called Sandinista Speak, Nicaraguans Defend the Revolution. This is just a little excerpt from that, from my series on my channel, Nicaragua Against the Empire. You can check that out on this channel. I'm going to play this clip and we'll talk more about it.
Estoy
aquí porque vengo de una familia muy revolucionaria. Este 19 de julio significa mucho para nosotros los nicaragüenses. Yo te voy a explicar qué significa ser revolucionario. Para mí significa amor, somos pueblo, porque revolución es cultura, es amor, es hermandad. Esto es revolución para nosotros los nicaragüenses. Yo los invito a todos ustedes que me van a ver ahorita a que nos informemos a través de nuestros canales que sí habla la verdad de Nicaragua. Aquí está un pueblo que está unido celebrando esta victoria, que la celebramos desde el 17 de julio, que significa la alegría de todos los nicaragüenses. Los invito a todos ustedes de que nos informemos sobre un poco de lo que es la revolución nicaragüense, lo que significa ser Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional. Aquí en Nicaragua se ha venido implementando lo que es programas sociales, le llamamos nosotros, y dentro de esos programas sociales entran sillas con ruedas, paquetes alimenticios que se le dan a madres de héroes y mártires cada mes. Cada mes nosotros hacemos la visita para entregarle lo que es su paquete alimenticio, le entregamos sus sillas con ruedas a las de tercera edad, aquel que lo necesite, aquel discapacitado, la infraestructura, tenemos hospitales, los mejores hospitales los ha hecho el Frente Sandinista. Tenemos carretera, antes costaba entrar a una comunidad, a un municipio que le llamamos aquí en Nicaragua, ahora no. Ahora si te dilatabas 8 días para llegar, solo son horas. Entonces el Frente Sandinista ha hecho mucho por nosotros los nicaragüenses. Yo siempre le digo a mis sobrinos que vienen creciendo, nosotros somos revolucionarios, no necesitamos de que nos vengan a calentar el oído, lo trabajamos día a día porque sí trabajamos para esta revolución. Así que el mensaje que yo le doy a mi Nicaragua es que sigamos confiando de que nosotros siempre vamos a estar al frente.
¿Qué mensaje tenés para el gobierno de los Estados Unidos que está sancionando a Nicaragua?
Yo les doy un mensaje, va a ser así a lo estilo nicaragüense. Así hablamos nosotros y más las mujeres que somos encachimbadas, como decimos aquí. No metan sus narices donde no les importa, porque nosotros no los necesitamos. Somos un pueblo dependiente de nosotros mismos. Aquí está nuestro comandante Daniel Ortega, la compañera Rosario Murillo, que cada día ella nos enseña qué es ser revolucionario. No los necesitamos, métanse en su vida. Ustedes tienen muchos casos de COVID, preocúpense por ustedes mismos. No los necesitamos y nos vale verga porque no los queremos aquí.
Venimos a celebrar hoy el 1979, la liberación de Nicaragua. Venimos a pasarla alegre, que Nicaragua es libre. Siempre vamos a ser libres porque así se luchó para este momento. Hoy eso es lo que celebramos. De 1979, la liberación de nuestra Nicaragua, y siempre ha sido libre. Aquí estamos felices, alegres, disfrutando. ¿Quién dijo que Nicaragua no está libre? Siempre está libre. Que digan lo que quieran. Aquí Daniel va a seguir para las próximas elecciones. Vamos a votar siempre en la 2. Vamos a seguir siempre siendo el Frente Sandinista, Nicaragua libre, y que viva Nicaragua libre. En realidad aquí tenemos escuela, salud gratuita, tenemos transporte, tenemos hospitales, tenemos la alfabetización, que se diga a los pueblos aledaños de aquí de Nicaragua, de Managua. Por favor, los hospitales en los pueblos aledaños también. El comandante siempre se preocupa por los pobres, y eso es lo que nos une más al Frente Sandinista, porque él se preocupa siempre por los pobres, más a la gente del campo, los campesinos. Siempre vamos a estar luchando con eso, para la alfabetización y todo.
¿Qué mensaje tenés para el gobierno de Estados Unidos que está sancionando a Nicaragua?
La verdad es que es un gobierno cobarde, pero ¿saben qué? Nicaragua tiene gente. Aquí Nicaragua nunca se va a rendir. Nicaragua, tenga sanciones o no, Nicaragua siempre va a salir adelante, porque aquí tenemos economía, aquí tenemos trabajo, gente que trabaja y que sabe salir adelante sin necesidad de otros países, nada. Que viva Cuba y Venezuela también. ¡Viva el Frente Sandinista! ¡Viva Sandino!
No, la cagaron. Dijeron otra cosa. Viva Daniel, viva Sandino, viva Nicaragua libre. Viva Daniel, viva Sandino, viva Nicaragua libre. Dale, dale.
los andinos! ¡Viva Nicaragua libre!
Me contaste aquel muchacho, el que vendía tortillas, se salió del seminario, va a meterse a la guerrilla, murió como todo un hombre, allá por el cementerio, cometió el atroz delito de agarrar la vida en serio, cometió el atroz delito de agarrar la vida en serio.
No se me raje mi compa, no se me ponga chusmón, que la patria necesita su coraje y su valor. No se me raje mi hermano, no me vuelva a ver para atrás, la milpa está reventando y es tiempo de cosechar.
If you guys want to check out the full video, that is Sandinista Speak, Nicaraguans Defend Their Revolution. That was from my time in Nicaragua. I don't drink, but everybody there was like fucked up, partying, having a good time. And it was a beautiful experience being around young communists who are optimistic, who are excited about communism. And this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation, because it's important for people like us, in particular young Black and brown communists from the empire, from Babylon, to go to these countries, to go to Cuba, go to Nicaragua, and meet other people like us. There's other people like us who are actually building socialism and doing amazing things. And so this is why, check out Venceremos Brigade, check out Friends of the ATC, check out Alliance for Global Justice, go on these delegations, hit me up here in the comments if you guys want to get involved. Erica, your final thoughts, comment on whatever you want to comment on Nicaragua and Cuba, and then we'll hear from Chris later.
I think that the documentaries that you've made was a big inspiration and part of why I wanted to go. I used that documentary as part of our PE when we were talking about when the Reinsert Act hit, right? And then he got sanctioned the day of his inauguration, and all those things were happening. A lot of the PE that I was doing around that time, your documentary was a huge help. One of the things I did when she mentioned about the bread baskets and for the Mothers of the Martyrs, I did learn that they are also now giving those bread baskets to the mothers of the Contras soldiers that passed. There's a sort of commitment to reconciliation, bringing the country together, that I found very interesting. That they are in the process of doing that as well. Especially for me, I'm like, I wouldn't give them shit,
They're better than us. I would like, fuck you guys.
But again, they're really committed to building a whole new society. I guess we hear a lot about building new worlds here and the emphasis on that and the language around that, but to see it in actual practice and what that looks like on a day-to-day was just incredible. I did one thing, we did go to where did we go to? Masala?
Masaya? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I got this.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah,
wow.
From,
that's so nice.
Guerrero. So we got to see him make it and all of this. So beautiful. Wow. It's like the whole district. It's like an arts district, I guess you would say, but it was so much beautiful art, and most of it, I was like, "How am I going to get that back?" Like those big pots I was looking at, just so much hands-on, workers-led projects, community-led projects. Meeting the women of FEM, I'm wearing their T-shirt right now. The women that I talked about with the peasant feminists. There's about 420 women that work around 8 cooperatives in Los Dios. They make coffee and wine and jam and all kind of things. And it was just an incredible experience to see people actually owning the means of their production and what that looks like on a community level and how much that has advanced the community. So, I was just very inspired leaving there. With 2 books that not really a book, but 2 books that I did want to mention. In this book, June Jordan's moving towards home. In 1984, she wrote that it got published in Essence magazine in 1984, but she has a piece called Nicaragua, Why I Had to Go There. And she actually talked about going there in the midst of the Contra Wars and seeing it for herself, having been a student of revolution and having talked revolution, but having to actually see revolution for herself and just what the experience of Nicaragua had taught her coming back. And then, of course, Triumph of a People by George Black. I was reading this before going there, so it provided me with a lot of context, especially around Somoza and what that looked like coming out of that. And then finally, this kind of details the era of the 1990s, which I think is also important. I had a chance to skim through it. Yeah, so I think it's very, very important to go to these places and see for yourself. You know, so many comrades have told me that they had a chance to go to Colombia, Nicaragua, Cuba, of course, Venezuela. You know, they tell you have to see these socialist projects for yourself to really understand. Just like Chris said, the conversations are vastly different.
Yep.
Vastly different. They're not having the conversations that we're having, especially around, you know, gender and gender-based violence. You know, the conversations are solution-based. They are working towards smashing these contradictions. Even like when I said the reconciliation, part of that is to smash those contradictions, to bring about peace and to bring about prosperous, you know, a prosperous Nicaragua, a self-sovereign and self-determined Nicaragua, especially in the face of the continuous sanctions. And I think the strongman arguments that we see that not only exist for Nicaragua, but Cuba as well, Russia, China, you know, Iran. It sort of dismisses that workers are capable, and they have it in, you know, they have it in their own hands, and they're empowered through government, and they're empowered by government. Even when we see these little clinics, when people describe the clinics as being a part of the community, they made sure to say that it's a part of the community because we are the community and we are the people who are keeping this clinic open. Like, that's why the clinic is a part of the community, not just by happenstance, but because we are making sure that this clinic stays open to provide for community. So, especially in the face of all that they're dealing with, it's just a different feeling to breathe revolutionary air, you know. Like, it's just different. It's a different sensation to see, and it's nothing for these people in their everyday lives, and it was so moving for me to have experienced that. And like I said, I took vigorous notes because, you know, this is what it looks like. This is the possibility that we sort of talk about, but they're not talking. You know, they're not having these conversations online. Yeah, so, and they also are acutely aware of the ways that online works and how it has worked against them, and the psyop. They're very, very clear ideologically and clear about the self-determination and Nicaraguan solutions for Nicaraguan problems. And I think that that's something that we can definitely learn from and emphasize in our own organizing here. Or if not, I'll just move to Nicaragua.
Yeah, no, definitely. Me and Ophelia have been out there, and it's every time we go, we're just like, dude, let's just fucking move here. But then it's like, you know, we have stuff here going on, and I know the feeling. It's amazing when you're there. You just feel rejuvenated. Same thing. And shout out to Harold Francisco Urbina Cruz. In Nicaragua, we support our government, and we work together to promote the restitution of rights. Beautiful logo emoji, by the way. That's the logo of the literacy brigades, alfabetización, of a campesino man and woman reading.
We saw the teachers. It was a whole parade of the teachers union. So it was like encouraging literacy. It was so random too, but yeah, they say they do that like weekly.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing, really amazing stuff. Chris, final thoughts from you. Your experience in Cuba, what message do you have for people now that you've come back, and why is socialist Cuba a model that as communists we should study, learn, and try to learn as much from and apply here, you know, in the U.S. in our struggle, and your experience overall?
Well, I mean, for one, like my experience in Cuba was, it's a strange feeling to like, you know, for one, like have these types of thoughts like in the imperial core, and then you go to a country like that, and it's not like you're like you're the outcast or you're the, you know, it's so, you know, for those 11 days that I was there, never once did I ever feel unsafe. You know, never once did I feel like I couldn't be myself. You know, never once did I feel like, you know, I didn't feel any of the types of things that I felt as soon as I got back to the United States. I think for me personally, one of the things that, you know, why it's important to study Cuba and why it's important to get with principled organizations to do solidarity trips. You know, this wasn't just a tourist thing. This was something that, you know, we actively, you know, have to support, you know, the Cuban people. You know, you know, a lot of times people talk about socialism and stuff in the West, and they get into all these abstractions. But, you know, socialism is not a myth. It's not some abstract theoretical thing. It's something that people are in the process of building in real time, and something that people have been struggling for, you know, for generations. One of the more transformative experiences that I had while I was there was, you know, the day that when we were in Santiago and we went to go visit the cemetery where Fidel is, where his remains are. And right next to his tomb, or tomb, I guess, there's, you know, Jose Marti on one side, and then on the other side next to his thing is a memorial to all of the internationalist, you know, fighters who went to places like Angola and Nicaragua, and, you know, fought and, you know, demonstrated internationalism, at least from the city of Santiago. And, you know, there's a plaque that talks about what revolution is, and a huge emphasis was made on internationalism. And so you see that, and then later that day we went to a discussion on the family code. And one of the people in attendance was a veteran from the liberation war for Angola. And so, you know, you see, you know, you see the importance of those sacrifices in real time, and you see the importance of that struggle in real time, and how that is carried on, you know, from generation to generation. You know, and again, the fact that our brigade that was represented there, you know, it was very much, you know, it wasn't just a bunch of little white kids. You know, it was very queer. It was very, you know, representative of those who do have to necessarily fight within the United States, or United States rather. But I think also one other transformative experience was on New Year's, which is the anniversary of the revolution in Cuba. Also, and when you're talking about the plaza, I was thinking about they have a flag raising in the plaza in Santiago, you know, for New Year's and for the anniversary of the revolution, and it's like everyone was out there with their kids, with their families, and, you know, they all, you know, have, you know, this experience of, you know, having the flag go up, you know, playing the national anthem, and, you know, everyone stood and waited because they have like this sort of, like, a superstition that if the flag blows to the left, then that's a good sign for the revolution. So everyone like kind of like stood there, like waited after the ceremony to see if it would blow. So, no, but it was really special, and I think in terms of organizing in the United States, we have to bring internationalism, and we have to bring, you know, these ideas of being in solidarity with people actively struggling against imperialism to our local efforts, and connecting it, you know, connecting the importance of that as our lives are impacted here. You know, I thought also about the song that you played in the intro by Victor Jara, and the kind of love that, you know, these revolutionaries also have for each other. The kind of love that folks in Cuba express towards places like China, towards Venezuela, towards Nicaragua, and the kind of love that it was expressed in that video of the women in Nicaragua, you know, towards Venezuela and Cuba as well. So, Yeah, I think that's yeah.
Cool, man. I'm sure we could talk about this for hours, but I know it's getting late out there on the East Coast. Out here in Cali, it's still 7:38. But I really appreciate having you guys on. Thank you guys for sharing your experiences. I'm so happy you guys were able to go to Cuba and Nicaragua. And everybody, please, I just want to read this one last thing, Harold. Greetings from Managua to our comrade Erica. You're always welcome to Nicaragua. The U.S. sanctions will not stop the struggle. A big hug from Harold Urbina, aka Shaggy.
Hi, Shaggy.
Shaggy.
Oh
shit.
I really truly enjoyed Shaggy so much. A lot of what I was discussing, especially about the dark years, we were in discussion about that a couple nights. So I appreciate it.
Most definitely. Shout out to Shaggy and Smokey on the grass. How do citizen power councils in Nicaragua work? Are they similar to committees for the defense of revolution in Cuba? Are there differences, and what can we learn from them in the West? Erica, you want to just quickly answer that before we head out?
I'm not too familiar with the citizen power councils in Nicaragua. I do know that they, like I said, everybody works in tangent with the ministries, but I can't really speak specifically to that, so I don't want to say something.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I'll try to find some information. Basically, from what I've seen in bourgeois Western media, they call them paramilitaries. That's what happened in 2018. But there's a lot of Sandinista. Every neighborhood has a Sandinista office.
Yeah.
And so you'll see a lot of spaces that have the Sandinista flag in front. And when these sort of coup attempts happen, a lot of the people come out and mobilize. But it's very underground and low key because they actually don't want to be out there putting out a tough presence because they don't want to. In Nicaragua, they say like we want peace, we don't want a chaos, and it's like for people to be out there, they could like easily. Daniel Ortega could call everybody in the country to mobilize, and you'd see millions of Sandinistas, red and black, and guns all over the country easily.
Yeah,
but they don't have to do that. They don't have to do that because they don't want to scare people, regular people off, and that's an important conversation, especially when you're talking to ultras or really like immature leftists in the West who fetishize violence so much, and they're like, they take their pictures of their guns, and like when I've interviewed former guerrilla fighters in Nicaragua, they're like, dude, those are the darkest days of my life. Like, I don't want to relive that. Like, we want peace and socialist construction. So, that's that. Just to kind of quickly answer that, but you guys are fantastic.
Because Babu Casa's wife, Mama Mamuna, she's in there, and he through the whole 10 days, he shouted, "Ni si vende, ni si vende." So everywhere that we went, so I see her saying it in the chat. So I didn't want to shout them out.
No se rinde ni se vende. Everywhere you go, we don't sell. Yeah, basically, like, yeah, we don't give. We don't bow down, and we don't sell ourselves. So we can tell that to the fucking. The squad and all these libs out here, so they won't know what the hell we're talking about, but we'll know. Inside joke among all of us here. Shout out to everybody watching, listening. Love you guys. Thank you so much, Erica and Chris. You guys are fantastic. We'll definitely have you back on soon. Love you guys so much. Thank you again. Viva Cuba Socialista. Viva Nicaragua Sandinista. Long live the Communist Party of Cuba. Long live the Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional. Victory to our peoples always, and shout out to Amilcar Cabral. Oh, beautiful flag, beautiful. Oh man, that's so amazing. Shout out to Amilcar Cabral, who I believe today is the anniversary of his assassination, if I'm not mistaken. Victory to Africa, victory to African revolutionary socialism, which is continuing. Shout out to Bab, shout out to everybody who's watching, listening. I love you guys. Have a great weekend. We're going to go out to some revolutionary music, of course. And be safe, y'all. Take care. Bye.
Peace.
Soberanía en mi tierra se escribió con letras grandes, no con
puede.